it's going to be appropriate for what we're talking about. I'm excited to have Chris Hamilton here. We're going to talk about healthcare. We're going to talk about the healthcare system, the industry, and that surprisingly, it is fixable. We have solutions. Hey, Chris, good to see you. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Charlie.
Well, I don't know if the viewing audience is going to be able to handle this much bald beautifulness, but for those of you listening on the podcast, I mean, listen, we're trying to find some solutions here. I mean, we're if this was just about complaining about the problems that we had, I mean, I could do that all day long, and I think that a lot of people would probably nod along in agreement. But if we're not offering solutions on top of that, then what good is this? You know, the healthcare industry to me has always struck me as having the way the system is set up in terms of, you go in and you go to the doctor, you go into the hospital, especially, and you're in an acute situation and you need help immediately, and they're going to do this and that and the other. There's no menu that they hand you. There's no big board above the reception desk that says broken leg, $500. This is, to me, it's like when you go to a mechanic. It's like, how much is it going to cost me? Well, I don't know. It depends on how long I need to spend on this car. And you feel like you're getting taken to the cleaners, whether it's your car or your health. And it feels very, I don't know, ineffective and inefficient. And it feels like there's a better system for that. Like, what is what is your how'd you get into this? What is your background? And do you see the same things with the healthcare industry that I'm seeing as sort of a layman here?
Yeah, I'll actually start off with a question. I'm going to ask you and the
Okay.
listening audience, answer this question for me. Name an industry where you'll go in and buy something that might cost as much as a car or a house. You're never told the price, and you don't know what it costs till after you've bought it. The buyer and the seller never meet to negotiate or agree on a price. That's arbitrarily decided by a third party somewhere else, and you get a bill 60 or 90 days later that you can't make sense of.
Yeah.
Name an industry that works that way.
There isn't one. And in fact, I just went through this a couple of months ago with my mother. My mother in Las Vegas, she went in for 5 days to have a gastric bypass situation. She had pancreatic cancer. It wound up killing her. But she had to have a bypass, and it was 5 days in the hospital, and she didn't really have any choice. She kind of had to do it. And when we got out, she had Medicare and she had Humana, and I guess the good news in the story is that in the end the balance zeroed out. But I got an itemized list of everything that was charged. It was $330,000. You could have bought a new house for the price of this. Now, like I said, it had a happy ending in that it didn't cost us anything. But I know that I'm in a minority with that, and so many
Yeah.
people wind up in bankruptcy because of it. It's a really flawed industry. But I guess the good news is that in these inefficiencies, someone like you comes along and you can find out ways to fix it, right?
Yeah, 100%. Well, one point I'll make before I jump into the background, you mentioned oftentimes it ends up in bankruptcy. When you look at the data, and there's different groups, Kaiser Family Foundation is a big
Mm-hmm.
research think tank that does a lot of research and reporting on healthcare statistics. But one of the recent reports showed that the majority of bankruptcies, or a vast majority of bankruptcies in the United States, were related to medical bills, and a majority of those related to medical bills, they had health insurance. And so when you think about what insurance is really designed to do, is to protect us in the event of a catastrophe, whether it's homeowners insurance, if your house burns down, or floods, or what have you, or you're in a car accident. It should protect us. But for many of us around the country, we either know somebody, or it's happened to us where we've had collections related to something that our health insurance didn't pay. And so that tells me that the system isn't working the way we expect it to. And I've come to that conclusion. So my background, I spent 15 years in corporate finance. I worked with employers nationally, whether it was helping them finance acquisitions or expand their operations, whatever it was. But I was financially minded. And when the Affordable Care Act was passed in 2010, and shortly after was being phased in, running up into 2013, 2014, I recognized these employers are going to be required to offer health insurance, or they're going to pay a penalty. It's a tax penalty, so it's not tax deductible. And looking at the margins of some of these companies, I realized this is a pretty big threat to those companies. So I began asking my clients, how are you managing healthcare compliance? Are you compliant? And I was really surprised. A lot of them just kind of scratched their head and said, we're still trying to figure that out. We don't know. And I'm looking at the financial statements. I realized, guys, this is a really big expense. How do you manage it? It looks like it grows every year. And the response I got was, there's not really anything we can do. It's what our broker and our insurance company tell us it's going to be. We just budget an increase and hope that it's within that range. And I thought to myself, some of these companies are multinational companies, are really sophisticated. They could tell me what their fuel costs or their plastic input costs were going to be 2 or 3 years down the road, because they'd hedge those costs. They'd enter into these financial transactions to figure that out. It was really critical to their business. But here's this really large expense item that grows every year. Oftentimes, it's as a percentage, it's growing faster than their revenue, so it's eating into their margin. And I'm thinking, there's got to be a solution to this. There has to be. And so that's what led me down this rabbit hole of researching, how does health insurance work? How does healthcare work? And what I recognized very early on is that, I mean, health insurance is it's a symptom. The cost of health insurance in America is a symptom. It's like if you were to put a thermometer in your mouth and you're running a 101 fever, okay, I have a fever, but that's not the root cause of the problem. That's just telling you that this is a symptom. Is it COVID? Is it flu? Do you have some other infection? You have to diagnose the root cause. And when you look at what drives health insurance pricing, it's almost a one-to-one correlation. It's the cost that the insurance companies are expecting to pay for healthcare, and healthcare costs are rising. But when you peel the layer back a little bit further, what healthcare are they buying and what are they paying for it? So you use the example of a car mechanic at the opening of the show.
Yeah.
What are they doing to the car, and what are you paying? If I came to you and you had a 1998 Toyota Corolla and I said I needed to replace the transmission, and Charlie, oh, by the way, it's going to be $30,000 for that transmission. You would say, I'm not, that makes zero sense. Right? But that's routinely what we see insurance companies doing, particularly for things that they own. And so as I started looking at the healthcare and health insurance economy, I realized right out of the gate, there's many conflicts of interest, and there's a misaligned incentive completely through the healthcare economy that causes us to pay more than we should. And the reason my focus is on helping employers lower their costs and improve the benefits that they offer to their employees, because when I look at the universe of Americans that are covered by insurance, the vast majority of insured Americans are getting it through an employer, and the employers are paying the vast majority of that cost. And they actually have more power than they realize, but they're kind of stuck in the system, if you will. Most people don't know what things cost. They don't know what they're buying. They don't know what their insurance company is buying, and they don't know what the insurance company is paying. Right. And a lot of that has to do with the way the system is designed. So when I look at the economy, people think often it's synonymous. Healthcare and insurance are the same thing, but the reality is they're not. They're actually two separate systems. So there's healthcare that's going into the hospital for a surgery, having a baby, seeing your doctor, getting a medication, walking into a pharmacy. That's healthcare. That's you're buying healthcare. Insurance is what we use primarily to pay for that healthcare, but there are other ways to do it. You can pay cash, you can swipe your credit card, you can set up a payment plan with a provider. Insurance is just one of the ways that we're paying for it. They're two separate systems, but they overlay each other because they're so tightly intertwined. And there's a couple of things that are happening both in healthcare and insurance that are really, a lot of people that I talk to, they would say healthcare is inefficient and insurance is inefficient. And then there's people on this other end of the spectrum that say it's completely broken or it's rigged. I don't disagree with either one of those sentiments. It's highly inefficient, and in many cases, it is rigged. And I want to kind of walk through for the listener to understand specifically what I'm talking about. So if you think about health insurance, so what's 2025? So think about it, 25 years ago. There were probably 15 to 20 different health insurance companies that were out there that you could individually or your company could buy insurance from. And today we've got 4 big commercial insurance companies. You can name them: Blue Cross, United Health, Cigna, and Aetna. And so what we saw with the passage and implementation of the ACA was this massive consolidation. Those big insurance companies gobbled up all the others, and it took away competition in the market. So what used to be 15 or 20 insurance companies is now 4. So that's more like an oligopoly, if you will.
It's like the media.
It is.
Yeah.
And we can talk about solutions to this further on in the conversation, but that's important to know. But they didn't stop there. Those insurance companies, after they consolidated, and really at the same time, they went on a path of vertical integration. And so what that means is they started buying subsidiary companies, or they started buying other companies in the healthcare space, and rolled them up as subsidiaries. So I'll give you a really good example. Been in the media recently for other things, but United Health. So people think of United Health as United Healthcare. That's the insurance subsidiary. The parent company is United Health Group. United Health Group owns an insurance company, but they also own an entity called Optum, which is really important, and it makes up a very sizable, almost the majority of their income, and that's their investment in healthcare. And so what does that mean? And by the way, this is what all the insurance companies are doing. So they own what's called a pharmacy benefit manager. That's also been in the news recently. Big PBM is what is the lingo, but a pharmacy benefit manager. What that entity does is it sets the price that the insurance company is going to pay for drugs. Okay. And also inside of Optum, probably in your area and any listener, Optum is the nation's largest employer of physicians nationally. They've gone around and bought up physician groups. So when you go see a doctor, if it's not affiliated with a hospital system, it may be owned by Optum. And Optum, that entity, bills the insurance company for the services that they provide. And the reason why that's important to understand is the more an insurance company pays for healthcare, the higher their prices for insurance have to go. So what do we see routinely happening? And I think this is another important thing to understand. The Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, it limits the profitability of an insurance company for most, mid-sized and larger employers. If you have more than 50 employees, their profit margin is capped at 15%. That's important to understand, okay? So if they make 16% profit at the insurance company in aggregate, they've got to give that 1% back to their policyholders. So they know they're only going to make 15%. So if you're an insurance company, you're publicly traded, you've got to report to shareholders, do you want to make 15% of $1 billion or 15% of a quadrillion? So immediately, these entities have every incentive. We think insurance companies actually want to help us lower the cost of healthcare, but they actually have the opposite incentive. So what happens is we see this routinely with every one of the insurance companies for things that they own in their subsidiaries that they overbill the insurance company for. The insurance company shows either a loss or a very compressed margin. They use that as justification to increase the price of insurance at renewal. Okay. And so they're overpaying for those services. They're paying $30,000 for that transmission in the old Toyota Corolla, and we see that routinely in the data that we examine with our clients. And so I think that's an important distinction that people need to understand, because when employers are buying insurance from one of these companies, typically for the majority of mid-sized employers that are out there, even large employers are doing this. They let the insurance company, the insurance group, manage all of the vendors. It's almost dictated to them. If you're going to use this insurance company, you have to use our network, our pharmacy benefit contracts, our providers. We give preferential treatment to our providers. We get to bill what we want. By the way, Charlie, we're not going to let you see what we pay. Of course. And we're not going to see what you're buying. You just turn over the checkbook to us, and we'll see you at renewal. And let's just hope and pray that the renewal is okay. And employers have been stuck in that market for so long, they've just become accustomed to it. So I just described what's happening on the insurance side. Now let's talk about healthcare. Okay. You mentioned you're in the Denver area. Anybody listening to this, if you're in a major metro area, this will resonate with you. Think back again, 20 to 25 years ago, what the hospital and doctor market looked like in your area. You used to have a number of hospitals. There were competitors. There might have been 5 to 7 different hospitals. You had probably an independent doctor, wasn't affiliated with a hospital system. Hospitals contracted for mostly for providers to work inside the hospital, the doctors. But fast forward to today, what do you see? The hospitals consolidated. So you had one dominant or two dominant hospital systems that bought up all the competition in the market, and they vertically integrated, similar to what the insurance companies have done. They bought the primary care physician groups. They bought the specialists, so the orthopedists and the oncologists and the dermatologists and the physical therapy. And then they started popping up other facilities around the city. What was that designed to do? It was designed, they wanted to capture two things is really what they were trying to accomplish. We have to own the patient journey. When you see our hospital, just name the hospital system, you see our hospital primary care doctor, if he's going to make a referral, it's going to be to one of the specialists that we own in the hospital. And if that specialist says that you need an image or a surgery, or your baby has to be delivered, if you're seeing an OB-GYN, where are they going to deliver the baby? In the hospital that owns them. They're required by contract to steer inside their hospital system. And this does two things. One, it ensures that they're capturing the patient wherever they enter the system, which you could argue is probably a good thing for the hospital. But what it's also done is it's created mega pricing power for these hospital facilities in every little market that you go to. Every market you go into Dallas, there's a major dominant hospital system. In Fort Worth, in Denver, in LA, and New York, there's a dominant hospital system there. And so what it ultimately ends up happening, how this relates to insurance pricing is, if you think about one of the big insurance companies, the way they're going to get employers to agree to do business with them is to have that hospital in their network. Well, who do you think in that transaction has pricing power? You see this all the time. There's a hospital that's threatening to drop out of one of the big insurance companies' networks. Call your insurance company and make sure they keep us in network. And then the insurance company will pipe back and say they're wanting outrageous demands in pricing. But ultimately, what ends up happening is they settle on a higher price, and it's not good for customers. It's not good for the policyholders. Prices are going to continue to go up. So what it's done is it's given them unfair pricing power with the insurance companies. The insurance companies have to have those hospitals in their network, or they're going to lose customers. So they ultimately end up having to pay the piper. And so the other dynamic that's interesting here, because you mentioned Medicare earlier in the conversation, and there's been a lot of talk about wanting to try to move to a single payer system. We should just do Medicare for all. Well, the first thing I would say is, if you just look at the federal budget, Medicare is the biggest thing that we spend in our budget. The government took in $2.9 trillion in tax revenue. That's not our budget, because we actually run a deficit, but I'm just talking about the money that we actually capture, paid in taxes. $2.9 trillion, 1.4 of that was Medicare and Medicaid payments. So it's almost half of our tax revenue. And I would argue that the pressure that providers are feeling, the hospital systems and doctors are feeling from Medicare, they don't get reimbursed the same way that they do from a commercial insurance company. So again, when I'm talking about commercial insurance companies, I'm talking about Blue, United, Cigna, and Aetna. Right. The government dictates what they're going to pay. We're going to pay you this, take it or leave it, here it is. And it's a very low reimbursement rate relative to what an insurance company will pay. And I'm not saying this is good or bad. I'm just trying to highlight what's causing pricing pressure in our economy right now. Right. So if the hospital, and just national average, hospital inflation is about 10%. Their costs are rising 10% a year. Medicare is already at a low reimbursement rate. Their reimbursements are going up 1 to 3% a year. So if you're a hospital system and you're looking at your P&L, well, my revenue is not keeping up with inflation. I can't dictate to the government more money. Who can I? Where's the pressure relief valve? And that pressure relief valve is the commercial market. Right. And if you look at hospital financial statements, they'll actually footnote this, and some of them they will footnote this dynamic that's happening, because you look at the payer mix. So some hospitals might have a really high government payment mix. So 60% of their payments are coming from the government, 40% is coming from the commercial market. They're going to have to demand a higher price from a big insurance company to be able to stay in a network, because they need that money, that increase. So the government's going up 3%, but we're going to demand 30% from a commercial payer. Well, who pays that? That's going to be the employers, and that's going to be me and you through our payroll deductions when we buy insurance through our employer. Hold on a second here. So it's a hidden tax, ultimately, is what it is. It's a hidden tax on commercial payers. And so this, I think it's important for people to understand, like, these dynamics. They're looking for a silver bullet, whether that's setting price controls, whether it's Medicare for all. I honestly think if we went Medicare for all, if the government just flipped a switch and said we're going to do Medicare for all, I think it might potentially crash our healthcare system as we know it, at least on the structure that Medicare has today, because facilities won't continue to be able to operate with the same service levels, the capacity that they have. It's just they're not going to be able to afford to operate. And you're seeing this happen right now. You're seeing it happen in smaller markets. So outside of the big cities, so we just mentioned, Denver and Dallas and LA and New York. But when you move into secondary markets and rural markets, there are hospitals nationally that are closing the doors because they don't have a commercial payer mix that supports the hospital. They're probably 90% government paid and 10% commercial, they don't have the revenue to sustain
Okay.
a viable hospital. And I think that's what's at risk. It's easy to sit here and say, just let the government take over and let them pay. But the current payment structure that Medicare has with facilities, they're not going to continue to operate. And I'm not shilling for the hospitals out there. I mean, they have they're culpable for what's going on in our economy. I'm not saying they're the good guys, and I'm not saying that the insurance companies are the good guys and going to be able to solve it. I certainly don't think they are either. So I'll pause there.
In Medicare, are the facilities required to take Medicare?
They're not required to, but they take Medicare for a couple of reasons. So one is, if you think about how large these facilities are, one thing that they want to ensure is that they've got patient volume. So think about, I'll just use another layman's example, a landscape company. This might be kind of crazy, but you got a landscape company. This summer, their lawn business is booming, and they've got a crew that's working for them. But in the wintertime, lawn business kind of takes a nosedive in the winter. So what do those landscape companies do to keep their crews busy and employed? They'll get into snow shoveling or snow blowing, or they'll get into Christmas light installation, or they're finding other ways to keep the crews busy so they can keep them. You've got to ensure patient volume to keep your doctors and your facilities open. And just from a business standpoint, hospitals don't make a lot of money on Medicare. And if you're a hospital CFO, if you're a business CFO and you're looking at this, does marginal revenue exceed marginal costs? Yes. And I've got capacity. It makes sense to go ahead and do it. So it's keeping the lights on. It's keeping patient volume. It's putting patients in beds. But there are other strings that are tied to Medicare. So there's grants and other federal funding that comes tied to that. So that helps pay for indigent care. So if somebody walks into a facility and doesn't have insurance, or they don't have, another way to pay. So there's other financial strings that are tied to Medicare that give hospitals incentive to help participate in that program. So it's not just the patient volume and that sort of thing, but there are other things tied to it. That's why they would take it.
What does the occupancy rate need to be for a hospital in order for it to kind of be above water?
Well, I'll start with this. I'm not a hospital CFO. There's a lot of variables that are going to go into that. Just thinking through the problem out loud, or the question out loud, it's going to really depend on your payer mix. So
Okay.
are you 80% commercial market paid and 20% government, or is it flip-flopped?
Gotcha.
And are you in a metro market where you're competing for talent? Do you have adequate staffing? How do you contract for your providers and care, that sort of thing? So there's any number of variables. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but if I took a guess, I would imagine it's probably north of 60%.
Okay. Yeah. I just wondered if it was one of those things where they've got to it's like a hotel. Like, we've got to run at I don't know, 90%, or else we're in trouble, and we're constantly needing more patients, more customers, right? But
Yeah, well, I think that's a better example than my landscape example. If you use a hotel, so actually, you know what, Charlie, that's a really good example. Let's take that and run with it for just 1 second.
okay.
Anybody listening to this has bought a hotel room. You can go directly to the hotel site and pay full price for the hotel.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can go to a travel site like Travelocity or Expedia or whatnot. And those hotels, they'll take a certain allotment because they want to ensure they're picking people off at different layers of the demand curve at pricing points. And they're going to take a certain amount of their room block, and they're going to put it on those sites because they know there are people that aren't going to pay full price for this. They're going to pay a reduced price. They can capture those tenants or those hotel stays that way.
Right.
The same thing actually happens in healthcare. And I think that's where there's a big opportunity, particularly with employers. So the focus of our practice is really trying to help employers solve for what they're paying for healthcare. A lot of people think the way to fix healthcare is just to reduce access. We're just going to cut access off for people, and we just deny the claims. Now, that is a tactic that a lot of the big insurance companies use when they're paying a third party.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not paying, they pay themselves differently than they'll pay everybody else. And you're seeing that play out in the news right now with denials of care and slow pay of claims payments and those sorts of things. They make everybody jump through hoops. That is one way to control the cost of health insurance and healthcare, but I don't think that's the right thing. I think if somebody's paying for insurance, there's an expectation that I pay good money for this, and when I get sick, I expect an insurance company to pay to treat me. And most of the employers that we work with, on virtually all of them, they want to pay for they want their employees to get what they need, and they want them to do it as frictionless as possible. But they want to be good stewards of their money. They don't want to pay $30,000 for that transmission for the old car. They want to pay a fair price. And what you often find is that working through a traditional insurance company, they don't have the incentive necessarily to help you make sure you're paying that fair price. They're more than willing oftentimes to contract to overpay for the healthcare to ensure that they've got that hospital in their network. And so you see these conflicts, and it doesn't make sense. Yet every year we turn our checkbook over to a third party that doesn't provide financial accountability, and they don't have the same interest to help us manage the cost.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. The incentive structures are wonky. They're totally warped here. That you that to they're going to pay more in order to keep this hospital in their network, and that cost is going to get passed down to us. It feels like I would love for there to be some sort of truth in pricing option, some sort of in advance, so that you have an idea, or so that you could shop around. I mean, the idea of people, the medical tourism is a huge industry. People are taking off to Mexico to get their knee replacement, or going to Turkey to get their boobs done, or whatever. You know what I mean? They're thinking, well, I'm doing the calculation, and for whatever reason, all things being equal in terms of the quality of service, like, it's 1/5 the price elsewhere. I might as well turn this into a staycation or a vacation, and a medical vacation. I was in the hospital. I was in the emergency room in Puerto Vallarta. I got thrown off a horse. I'm in there just feeling like, I'm like, oh my God, I think I broke my rib. And I'm sitting in the lobby, and there's a big screen TV, and it's just running a loop ad for this facility where I am. And it's like, come on down to Mexico, and we'll do this and that, where you want hair restoration and your lips done and collagen, and we've got this and all these other things that weren't. And I'm in there just wanting to get my, be able to breathe again. But I was looking at that going, boy, there are a lot of options here. I could imagine people coming down, booking a week at the Marriott down the street, and coming in getting hip replacement or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So a couple of things you hit on. So price transparency.
Yeah.
I can walk into McDonald's, and on that menu board, they're not only going to show me the price, they're going to tell me how many calories are in it, grams of protein, grams of all that information that I need to make an informed decision as a consumer. I walk in, I know what I'm getting, I know what I'm paying, and I know what's in it. And we exchange money there at the counter. Right. There was a goal to have a similar type model for hospital services, because if I can do it for a Big Mac and it's a few dollars, shouldn't I be able to do that for something that's going to be it could be a very significant portion of my paycheck or my savings? Nobody buys a car without knowing what it's going to cost, and healthcare is equivalently priced, and oftentimes more expensive if you're going into a hospital. Why can't we have prices before we make a payment? And why can't I shop around? And love them or hate them, there's a lot of, hate out there for Trump. But one of the things that he did before he left office was pass pricing transparency. He wanted hospitals to post their prices and have us as American citizens be able to shop for our healthcare and know what we're going to pay before we actually buy it. And that became law. And what was interesting is that hospitals decided, we're not going to comply. We don't want to post we don't want to post our prices. And the hospital lobbied in Washington to remove that. They said it was going to be too onerous for their business, and it was going to put them at a price. It was going to put an undue burden on them, and it was going to reduce competition, not increase it. It was going to be a financial hardship for them to do that. But it's in the best interest of the American public to know what we're going to pay. If I have insurance or I'm a cash buyer, I should know what it's going to cost. And they fought tooth and nail. And it's finally now being adopted, because the penalties the hospitals have been increasing, forcing them, if you don't comply with this, there's going to be a penalty to you. And my hope is that we're going to see a continuation of policies like that work in the favor of the American public to drive the changes that are necessary. Because if you think about healthcare and insurance, it's not only a societal problem. I think and it is a societal problem, and it's also an economic problem.
Mhm.
What we pay for healthcare is almost 20% of our GDP,
It's crazy.
and it's an inefficient and broken model. But let's break it down to a personal GDP. Just personally, what does this mean for an American citizen? If you have insurance through an employer, or maybe even if you buy it individually on an exchange, and you don't get much or no subsidy at all, it represents a very large percentage of your paycheck. If you try to insure a family, it can be $2,000 a month for coverage. And so that's $24,000 a year. That's just for insurance. Now, when you go
Right.
buy healthcare, there's a deductible, and it could be $3,000, $4,000, $6,000. So you pay $24,000 a year for the insurance. When you actually need healthcare, you're going to pay another $6,000. That's $30,000. If you just look at the average wage of America, you can't afford it. But let's just say you make $100,000 a year, and you're paying 30% of your income for insurance and healthcare. That's a societal problem. That's an economic problem, because the money that's being pumped into that system today is being taken from us. It's a hidden tax, but it's money that no longer goes into college education for our kids. It doesn't go into our 401k for retirement. It doesn't go into the down payment for our new house or a new car or that family vacation. It's money that's being taken from us, and what it's doing is it's stealing the American dream from Americans, and it's being pumped into a broken system where people profit in ways where there's conflicts of interest, and it doesn't have to be that way. So the second point I would make is, you talked about medical tourism, going to Mexico or Turkey, and that does exist. But guess what, Charlie? That exists in America today. I'll give you a perfect example. My own personal example. I had a hip replacement in January of 2020, like right before COVID. And this really highlights some of the work that forward-thinking employers are using, strategies that they're using to solve this problem. So my plan, I've designed our plan here at Hotchkiss Insurance. We're partially self-funded. And so we get to pick the network and the administrator and the pharmacy benefit manager. But the other thing that we do is what's called direct contracting, because I knew medical tourism was an important component. Because if a hip replacement in my area, I'm in Dallas-Fort Worth area,
Mhm.
insurance companies will pay anywhere between $60,000 and $100,000 for a hip replacement.
Okay.
And so remember, the more we pay for healthcare, the higher insurance costs, the premiums have to go to pay for the healthcare. So if you can manage the cost, not by denying claims, but by paying a fair price, you can lower the cost of insurance and provide more benefits to the people that are insured. And so in this particular case, we have what's called a direct contract. There's a hospital here in town. So in Dallas-Fort Worth, there's a couple of hospitals. And what we do is we go to a hospital system and say, hey, oftentimes you're kind of a bad guy. A patient walks in, they've got to give you $5,000 for their deductible. By the way, do you know how much hospitals collect on average of a patient deductible?
No, how much?
They collect 30 cents on every dollar.
Really?
So guess what they do with the other 70 cents that they don't collect? They send you to collections. So, this has been documented well across the United States. They take you to court. They garnish your wages. They become a bad guy in their hometown because Charlie didn't pay his bill. We're going to collect on him. And when he doesn't, we're going to ding his credit. And then we're going to, we may end up, depending on the size of the bill, we may have to take him to court and get a judgment against him. So the hospital's kind of a bad guy in that scenario. So if you actually approach the hospital system and say, look, what if we cut out this whole insurance network deal? You don't have any preferential treatment. I can go to Dallas or I can go to Fort Worth. There's a couple hospitals in each town. We will make the patient cost $0. You won't have to collect a dime from them. We'll make it free for the patient. And if we just cut out that insurance rigmarole where you got to bill the insurance company, you got to wait 90 days to get paid, the claim's probably going to get denied, and then you got to rebill it and submit it and just do this whole rigmarole. There's an administrative cost to that. If we just paid you within a week or two of that procedure, what would you take for it?
Right.
And so it's almost like walking in and say, if I just paid cash, what would I get? What would you give me?
What's my price?
What's my price, right?
Yeah.
And so to give that example, my hip replacement with the network that we use, because I use a national network, but I have this other option where we've got providers, hospital providers that are willing to provide these procedures. On my network, it would have been $68,000 to $70,000 for the hip replacement. we paid $20,000 for my hip replacement. And I got to see the surgeon and I got to go to the hospital that I was going to go to anyways. And so my experience was I walked in, I paid $0. I have a high deductible plan, but because I chose a provider that we have a contract with, it was $0 to me, and my health plan, which is run by me, it's my company, our employees pay into it, the employer, my company, pays the other part of it. We were able to reduce our cost of a claim by $45,000 to $50,000. So that's the justification. If Chris wants to make a good decision and he wants to get access to free healthcare, we'll pay for it. He has no cost for it. So there's an incentive for me. There's an incentive for my company to do that because we saved a ton of money and the provider's happy. But think about that model versus a traditional insurance plan.
Yeah.
It required somebody to go in and set all this up, and it put the buyer and the seller together to make a decision where we could say, let's put common sense into this, guys. If we just paid you directly and you didn't have to go through the insurance rigmarole and we just paid you cash and you didn't have to collect from this guy and be a bad guy to send him to collections, statistically, you're going to have to. What's that worth to you?
Yeah.
And they say $20,000. And the reality is you can do that with everything in healthcare. We do it nationally now. When you go into a big city, you can do that now. So as opposed to having to send somebody to Mexico or to Turkey or to the Cayman Islands, you send them down the street to a doctor that they probably already have some familiarity with, and a system they have some familiarity with, and you can get that same price that you would get in another country, but you're able to pay for it in a way that makes a lot of sense. And when you do that repetitively, so that was one example where we save $50,000, but you can do that with prescription drugs, you can do it with having babies, you can do it with just about cancer treatments, you can do it with everything. When you repeat that same cycle in any given population, costs come down. And when the cost of healthcare comes down, so too does the cost of the insurance. So now there's a financial benefit. So when I got into this business, coming from a finance background, my approach was meeting with CEOs and CFOs, and I say, I'm going to help you rein in this exorbitant cost, and I'm going to improve your profitability by doing it. Because if I can save you $1 million or $2 million or $3 million, if a company trades at 5 times earnings, and I save you $1 million, I just added $5 million of value to your company.
Right.
And executives were like, yes, that's a great idea.
Your finance background probably comes in very handy. I bet most people that are in the healthcare industry aren't finance guys, and vice versa. So your ability to speak their language, I'm sure, probably resonates with them.
Yes, but what I realized very quickly with my first client that I did this for, I said, here's how we're going to design the plan. We're going to pay a fair price. We can help your employees. And my end goal at that time, I want to preface that at that time, at the very beginning of this journey, was I'm going to improve your profitability. Yeah, you'll be able to offer more benefits to your employees, but we're going to help improve your profitability. But very early on, it was probably within the second month after we did that first plan, I got an email, and then I called the member. I got an email from a member that was an employee of my client telling me they were able to get a back surgery they had waited for years to get because they couldn't afford it. And I thought, oh, she used one of my programs. I'm going to call her and find out what her experience was like. And I remember this like it was yesterday. She literally broke down in tears, telling me how badly she needed this procedure and she could not afford to get it. And because these programs, she was able to access it at no cost, and she's now better. And I realized at that moment, oh my gosh, this isn't about profitability. This is a way to help people that are hurting. And I've seen it in my own family. I have a brother that was bankrupted by his healthcare bills, and he worked for a Fortune 500 company, and he had big company benefits, but he was in and out of the hospital over a span of 4 years. And between what he paid out of pocket, what he paid for the insurance, what he paid for out-of-network providers, it bankrupted him. He was one of those statistics that I had insurance, but I'm bankrupt now. And it was the combination of those things that I realized there's a bigger there's a bigger mission here. There's a need for this in our society. Yeah. And the reason why I like educating on this is because these things that we're working and using and having success nationally with, those are things that can be scaled at a larger national level. It's inserting common sense into the way we buy something. It's recognizing when somebody's ripping us off and not doing business with them. It's finding somebody that doesn't make more money the more we spend. They actually can make more money the more we save.
I- I'll tell you what, I have to tell you this story because I didn't even know this was an industry until I was living in Las Vegas and I was selling real estate, and I sold this multi-million-dollar condo to this lady. And I would get to know my clients really well and chit chat about what'd you do? Oh, Harvard MBA. Oh, cool. Well, what does your company do? She says, well, my company goes through medical bills. And what we do is we find the duplicates or the flaws in the medical bills. And for whatever we save in this payment, we take a cut of it for ourselves. And I go, and you find errors on people's bills quite frequently? She's like, every bill, all of them, we can find something. It, it doesn't cost you anything. We're just going to go through the bills and we're going to find where the flaws are. We'll work it our way with the provider and say, you're overcharging here, 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 and we'll get that reduced. And then we make money. The people feel good. And I said, oh my God, I didn't even know that was a thing. She's like, yeah, we've been doing this for a while, and there's a lot of people doing it. And I was like, okay, so I didn't even know that was a viable business option, and yet she's paying cash for a multi-million-dollar condo, and there was, and I realized, okay, this must be very lucrative. Is that you're familiar with that concept?
Oh, yes. And the thing is that most employers, because they don't know what the insurance company is paying, nor do they know if it's a fair price, many of them are not using a program like that. But I have a client that just last year, they found over $1.5 million in savings by auditing the bills, and not all the bills. It's auditing the big bills. If you look at any population, just take the totality of an employer population, there's really 2 to 10% of that population. So if you've got 1,000 people, it's anywhere between 20 and 100 people that drive the majority of healthcare. Think about this for a second. And the vast majority of people that are on an insurance plan, they're going to go in and have a sick visit. They're going to take a basic medication that's not very expensive, a generic drug, whatnot. Maybe they get the flu once a year, something like that. Maybe there's a big percentage of the population that won't use their health insurance at all. They're just healthy and have it for catastrophe. But there's a small subset of that population that's going to go in and have a bypass, or they're going to have a premature baby, or they're going to undergo cancer treatment. And oftentimes with those really complicated episodes of care, the hospital is billing for multiple days, multiple treatments, things that are ongoing. And you find tons of errors in there where there's for one episode, it should be a bundled cost. Mm-hmm. But then the provider will break that. Not only will they bill for the bundle, but they'll bill for itemized items that were paid for in that bundle. And that's where you find these errors. And it happens all the time. Hospitals are trying to figure out how to increase their reimbursements. Speaking of Optum, they own the largest consulting firm that teaches hospitals how to game the billing system to get more out of an insurance company. I mean, make it make sense, Charlie. I mean, make it make sense.
What's funny is that I drive by, not every day, but a lot of times on this freeway, and there's big high rises, and I never knew what Optum was, but I could see it on the side of the building. I said, the buildings are the Optum buildings, and I never understood what it was, and now I understand why they're able to afford those big buildings.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, and there's been a lot of talk. They're the bad guys. And I can really understand the sentiment. I mean, the tragic shooting of Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare. Right. When you look at social media reaction to that, a lot of people are praising, claiming that it's justified. And I really think that is just a symbol of the frustration that Americans, rightfully so, that we have with insurance. And it's like a flashpoint moment, if you will. But I would just offer those companies are. I'm not talking about, there's a difference between legal and moral. Right. I want to make that distinction. And I'm not, claiming that they're in the right, but I'm going to go somewhere with this. They're operating a legal business. The laws and regulations have been designed, and these companies have been able to build a business around that that's profitable. I'm not saying right. I'm not saying moral, but he's not a drug dealer per se. He's not, trafficking arms. He's not, involved in terrorism. although some people would describe that as such with their experience. But for all intents, it's a legal business.
Yeah.
So who allowed that legal business to build and thrive? It's regulators and lawmakers.
Yeah.
And so when you look at where money has been spent, not only where lawmakers make money, like off the books, but if you look at, and this is public, the lobbying dollars that are spent in Washington is public information. You can research it. And so anybody that wants to challenge me on this, just go look it up yourself. The largest lobby in Washington is the healthcare lobby, and that's going to be the hospital lobby, physicians, insurance, and big pharma. And just to give you kind of a scale of the money that's been spent just in the last decade, it's $6 billion over 10 years.
Just in lobbying?
Just in lobbying. And you can see who specifically is spending that lobbying dollar by company. And so the question I would ask is $6 billion over 10 years. If somebody was lobbying to improve this system and lobbying for change with that kind of money and that kind of time, don't you think we'd have it? Yeah. And so what it tells me is that they're lobbying to keep the music playing. They're buying influence to allow them to do their next mega merger or their acquisition, to not require transparency, to allow the big pharma to rape and pillage through our health plans, and pharmacy benefit managers rape and pillage through our health insurance plans. Don't stop us from doing that. We're going to keep paying the money to keep the music playing. And that is another conflict of interest, in my opinion, because I don't think the lawmakers really understand the impact nor how to solve the problem. And the solutions, people are always asking, like, well, when is the government going to swoop in and make changes to solve the problem? And my first thought is why wait for the government? Why not take action now?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
There's a book that, if anybody's interested in this, I read it a year or so ago. It's called The Company That Solved Healthcare. And it's written by a CEO, runs a company, the name of the company is escaping me, but he runs an auto parts manufacturing business, or a wholesale business, supplying car makers in the Midwest. Mm-hmm. And so he's not a large business. He's subject to the whims and the pricing demands by the big automakers. Mm-hmm. So his margins are very small. And he realized that healthcare, the cost of his company's insurance and providing to his employees, because providing to the employees is really important to this company, it's going to bankrupt the company and put them out of business if we don't figure something out. And so he went on a mission of doing some of the things that I've just mentioned to you. How do we incentivize people to get the healthcare they need, and we pay the right price, and we give them a reward when they do it? And so he wrote a book outlining and detailing in great detail his journey to fix healthcare in his business. And I read this book, it was about a year ago, and I thought, oh my gosh, this really resonates. A lot of these things that are things that I'm doing, and some of them are a little bit different, but I'm like, when was this book written? And I open up the inside cover to the publish date, and it was published in 2009.
Really?
Before the ACA was even passed. And so just to put that into perspective, this gentleman he embarked on this fixing healthcare in his company years before he published the book. So he probably started this journey in 2004, 2005, wrote about it in 2008, published it in 2009. And so people wonder, well, where's the solution to healthcare? It's in front of you right now if you're willing to ask the right questions and to work with the right people and to challenge what you've always been told by the big insurance company and your health insurance brokers. So if you think about that manufacturer or any business, they're in your neighborhood right around you. You don't realize it, but they're big employers that you may not recognize the name because they're not a Fortune 500 company, but these companies employ the majority of Americans nationally. We think it's Amazon, but when you add up all these small and mid-sized employers, they're a very significant employer of people in the United States. And they're not experts in healthcare. So you've got a CEO that really knows transportation, and you've got a CFO and an HR leader, and this is outside of our expertise. We're going to hire a consultant, a broker, somebody that can bring their expertise to help us solve this particular problem. And that happens inside of companies every day, whether it's IT or healthcare or whatever it is, right? That's a very common practice. Yeah. But when you look at what's going on inside of the brokerage community, so I haven't really talked about that, but brokers, a lot like real estate brokers, the higher the price tag, the higher the commission.
Yeah.
So if you're a healthcare broker, which is what I am, I'm a broker, consultant, advisor, whatever you want to call me. Most brokers are going to get compensated in two ways. It's commission and it's a bonus at the end of the year from the insurance company. This is really important to understand as well. So I describe what's going on in healthcare. I describe what's going on in insurance. That same thing is happening inside the brokerage community. You've got big brokers who are going out and buying up. They're consolidating as much as they can to get premium volume, right? Written premium. And so out of the gate, what's the incentive of a broker? It's for you to pay less or pay more. It's like, okay, traditional broker, I walk in, hey, Charlie, you got bad news. Your insurance costs are going to go up 30% next year. I'm so sorry. And as he walks out, he's like, yeah, well, I'm getting a 30% raise off to the golf course, right? Yeah. That's one thing that's wrong in my industry. And so you see a lot of brokers, I think this is a good thing. It's changing to where a lot of brokerages are working on a fee basis. But there's this other compensation I just described, a bonus at the end of the year, which I think is a conflict of interest. It skews the judgment of a lot of brokers. These big insurance companies will come into a big brokerage and say, hey, you've got this much, a couple $1 billion of written premium with us. If you keep that premium with us and you add to it, we're going to cut you a check at the end of the year. And that check is probably going to be a large 7-8 figure check. So we're not talking about pennies here. We're talking about very large sums of money. And these brokerages, they're publicly traded or they're private equity owned. They answer to shareholders just like the insurance companies do. They're not going to cannibalize their earnings. They've got to meet their earnings guidance. And so I think that's a big conflict of interest. I think it's something that has to be addressed. There was an attempt to address it in the Consolidated Appropriations Act. Brokers are supposed to disclose how they get paid. We find a lot of brokers don't comply. They're not specifying how that bonus money is paid or how much is paid. Right. But in my mind, it's skewing the judgment of advisors, the very people that companies are trusting to help them solve this problem. They don't have the incentive to actually fix it.
Yeah.
So it's not all doom and gloom. It's not all doom and gloom. Okay. I know it's kind of depressing.
Well, look, we want the truth. We want you lay it out like how it is, and then consequentially, how do we navigate ourselves around it? So if you're somebody listening and you're working for, maybe let's say you run a company, it'd be a shame. You're making brake pads. You expect maybe that your competitor who also makes brake pads is going to make them better or cheaper than faster than you and put you out of business. The irony that you'll get put out of business because of healthcare. Right, that you're trying to offer your employees. It seems like of all the things that sinks this ship, it shouldn't be that, and yet it is. So if you're somebody who runs, let's say you run like a big enough business that you've got employees and you're part of your luring, the good high quality candidates is that, hey, listen, we've got some great benefit packages here, and part of it is healthcare, and we've got to lure them. We've got to give them something here. They're expecting that. And we're going to pay for a large portion of it, but how do you navigate this system? How would you change things if you wanted to make it so that you don't get put out of business by being forced to buy healthcare, but you still want to provide it, whether someone forces you to or not. You think it's the right thing to do, but man, you got to make a profit too. So how do you navigate the system for one of these small businesses? What's the best thing for them to do?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The very first thing that you have to do is to get transparency into what you're buying. So that's what are we buying, how much are we buying, and what are we paying for it? And then the next question is, are we paying fair prices for it? Okay. And oftentimes when we start there, that's where I meet most of my clients is we start with that. And then there's usually a strategy that's built. It's typically a 3 to 5 year strategy to get them to on this path of being able to solve the problem. The fastest wave that I'm seeing in our industry is this move to what's called partial self-funding. So where the employer creates what's called it's a nonprofit health plan, which makes sense. We're not into offering healthcare for profit. We don't want to make other people rich off of our costs and off of our employees' backs. And by doing that, it gives you immediate transparency, access to the data, but it also gives you customization. So I mentioned a lot of the insurance companies will dictate who you work with, and it's their providers, it's their network, it's their administration, it's their pharmacy benefit management. So what this does, it unlocks this ecosystem, the creativity that an employer them not being healthcare experts is where they got to lean on the right advisor. And I teach advisors nationally how to do this. And that's something that gives me excitement because I see it growing. But by doing this, you can pick the network that you want to use. Networks, the insurance companies have good networks. That's great, right? Let's use them for what they're good at. We'll use that network. But then you get to pick, and Mark Cuban has done a really good job of this, where he's exposed what's going on in the pharmacy benefit space. I'm not sure how aware you are with that, but he's highlighting the schemes and the ripping off that's going off by these insurance company pharmacy benefit managers. We don't want to work with them for that. But there are other independent pharmacy benefit managers. You can go to any pharmacy that you want, but we work with ones that aren't allowed to profit the way the big insurance companies do. Most common way big insurance companies profit off of drugs, they set the price that the insurance company is going to pay. It's a $100 drug. Pharmacy, you're going to charge $150. Mm-hmm. We're going to pay you $100. The other $50 goes in our back pocket. Right. They're adding revenue on top of a cost of a drug, and we don't know it. Right. That's called spread pricing. That's happening. The other way is they're taking money from big pharma in the form of rebates and other remuneration to pad their pockets. So you don't have to work with those pharmacy benefit managers. You can pick your own. There's dozens of them out there that contractually are not allowed to make money that way. And what it does is it allows you to lower the net cost of those drugs. Because again, I go back to the surgeries and these other things. The less we pay for the healthcare, the lower the insurance costs have to be to pay for it. And so it's not that we're denying care or we're limiting access. We're actually providing the same, in often cases more. But because we're paying the right price for things, we can buy more of it at a lower cost. Right. And so you're actually enhancing the benefits that you offer to people that are insured. And so that's the biggest wave that we see is moving from these traditional fully carrier managed, they're called fully insured plans, into partial self-funding. There's different mechanisms that we use to do that. I don't want to get too technical, but I'm a big fan of using group health captives. It's where employers band together to buy insurance, and they're buying insurance at scale. It actually makes it safer than being fully insured. Okay. And that's the foundation to be able to move into these other iterations, if you will. Most employers are not doing it all, ripping the Band-Aid. Some of them will, but many of them, it's a 3-year journey. You make incremental changes every single year to improve the benefits and reduce the costs. But, I look at it and say, it's the way we would manage anything else in our personal finances or in our corporate finances. Know what you're buying, know what you pay for it, and understand if it's a fair price or not. And if it's not, contracting in a way that allows you to get it at a fair price, because you can offer more for less.
We're just not educated on this stuff. Nobody tells us that these are options out here, that we're just told you have to do it this way, and you got to get this big insurance company. And as you say, the consolidation has really limited your options. And of course, they'll sell it to you as, oh, well, bulk pricing, and we get, you're going to get the best prices from us because we're the big guys and we can afford to grind them down and lower the price. No, they're not doing any of that, of course. But what they are doing is removing our options for dealing with other smaller companies that we might prefer. And that has been a problem in a ton of different industries, not just healthcare, but also we've seen it with the media. And in terms of the information diet that we get, it's not 50 companies, now it's 5. And so because it's 5, you get homogenization across those, and you only have to control 5 CEOs, not 50 CEOs if you want a certain version of the news to go out that way. And so I don't know why it would be surprising to find out that the healthcare industry has undergone the same thing. Was the Affordable Care Act just a complete suicidal mission by our government, or
oh man, what a big question. I have a contrarian viewpoint. I'm skeptical. Medicare for All had been tried in the past unsuccessfully. And so this is just my personal opinion, but I think the Affordable Care Act, first, by the way, it didn't create access. It didn't bring more physicians. It didn't bring more healthcare into the system. Right. It mandated the way insurance was going to be offered. Okay, so I think that's an important point to point out. I think the people that passed it knew that it was going to accelerate pricing and cost. And I think ultimately the end goal was to create a system that was going to be unsustainable, create a problem so that the government can swoop in and solve it, because Medicare for All had been tried. It was unpopular. Not nobody, but the vast majority of Americans didn't want it at the time. So let's just make a problem that's so big that the only solution is for the government to step in. That's my personal belief based on the way I see the law being enacted and the response in the market. You did make a really interesting point a second ago about the media companies. We had a bunch of media companies, and now we only have a handful now. They control the narrative. But look at what that's done, Charlie. It's created a platform for people like yourself and a new media. And the Affordable Care Act and the consolidation that's happened in healthcare and insurance has created a new insurance ecosystem, a platform, if you will. And that's growing alongside of forms of media like this. And you're seeing employers that have said, no more. We're going to do this a different way. We're not going to go to the big media. We're going to go to a nuanced niche media that's going to give us the truth and give us what we need and more. And you're seeing that in other industries. My industry is one of those. So I think that's also, I'm an analogy guy, so I'm going to steal that.
It makes sense. No, it does make sense. And they create such a big problem that you're almost forced to find a solution to it in a smaller way. We in the podcasting, alternative media, whatever, we're sort of a solution, an option for somebody that wants to opt out of the major 5 news organizations. And you are somebody who is an option for people if they were interested to opt out of this broken healthcare system. And I feel the same way you feel. I mean, there's a strategy called Clower and Piven, which is when they overload these two people came up with this concept in the 60s. You overload the welfare system, you get so many people, you invite everybody onto the welfare system so that you break it and then rebuild it in a different format and with the government involved. And it feels like that's the same thing with the healthcare. Let's force everybody into the system, a broken system, a sinking ship already. Let's force them all in so that we destroy the whole thing, and then we'll have the government come in and save the day and fix the problem that they themselves created by their regulation. And I'm sure $6 billion of lobbying goes a long way towards getting politicians to not look at the cost damage this will be over the next 10 years for the consumers. I mean, there's a lot of money spending on these guys to make them forget all that, I would assume.
Oh yeah, and you see, you can just research some of the blockbuster acquisitions that have happened over the last 3 to 5 years. Many of them have been challenged by the Department of Justice, but miraculously, they end up getting tossed out, and those acquisitions are allowed to go forward. And so I think that's a problem. And oftentimes somebody will ask, well, what is the solution if the government was to take action? If you just look at what the government did in the 80s with Bell Communication, right? The government stepped in and realized there's a monopoly that's happening over our telecommunication system. It's not competitive. We have to break this up. And I think you're going to see I think it should be an initial focus of the new administration, is to look at how these companies have consolidated the pricing and the profiteering that they're doing, and break those up so that people have choice it'll create more competition. A big insurance company shouldn't be able to force people to use their owned vendors, and we can create choice. And people can choose to work with different entities if they want to build their own plan. That exists today. That's a lot of the work that we're doing. You don't have to wait for the government to solve that. But at scale, like you mentioned, a lot of people don't understand how healthcare works. A lot of the brokerage community is not necessarily doing it and doesn't have the incentive to do it. And this would be more of a way, I think of it as a push-pull system. Right now, we're pulling with employers on how to build these. But if the government created a system where it was a little bit easier, and we broke some of these the conflicts of interest and misaligned incentives up, I think it would help expedite that.
Well, I'm assuming that people are going to be listening to this and having an epiphany, realizing that they probably need to make some changes to the extent that they can, even with their relationship with the healthcare system. If somebody wants to reach out and get connected to you, into your company, into what you're doing, and find out more information about this, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I've got 2 places. I created a website that's kind of a central hub for everything that we do. It's fixhealthinsurance.com. And so I've got what I call a playbook. And this is a consulting strategy that I'm using with my clients to help understand where those conflicts are and how to solve for it. how to reduce their costs and improve the coverage that they provide their employees. I've got a checklist. A lot of times people will ask, how do I hire a broker? How do I know I'm working with somebody? It's just like any other profession. You go in and talk with a doctor. It's hard to gauge the quality of that doctor. Are they leading edge, or are they just kind of a traditional treat me to the manual type? So I created a checklist that employers can use when they're interviewing brokers. So it's got an answer key. These are the answers that you're looking for to determine, are you working with somebody like me that's forward thinking, has a contrarian viewpoint, and really understands the nuance of the industry and knows how to solve your problems. I've got a YouTube channel. I've got a solo cast and a lot of educational content that's out there. So if somebody was just to go into YouTube and search for Benefits Insider, Chris Hamilton, got a ton of educational content there that breaks down what's a captive, what's a PBM, how to design a high performance plan. There's a lot of educational content there that people can consume. Use it with your broker. Ask them these questions. These are questions you should be asking. And I think one of the best pieces of advice I would give to people is to challenge the answers that people give us. When somebody tells you, there's not really anything you can do, you probably should look elsewhere. You need to get a contrarian viewpoint, because as I mentioned with the company that solved healthcare, the book, these solutions are not new. They've been tried and true. I've been using them for a decade. That gentleman's been using them for 20 years. And it's for the benefit of the company, and it's for the benefit of the employees as well. So I challenge everybody to ask why not, and to challenge the assumptions that we're given by the people that we trust to solve the problems.
There's a lot that we don't know about this. Those of us who are not in the industry and we feel like we're at a severe disadvantage, it's really good to bump into somebody like you who can explain it in a way that makes sense to us. And that I think that's the first step towards fixing it, is you got to understand that you have a problem and how to navigate the problem. And I'm really glad you came on to discuss this with us. That's Chris Hamilton, everybody. You can go check him out. I'm going to put the link down at the bottom, fixhealthinsurance.com. You can check that out. And if you want to connect with me, the website, macroaggressions.io, is the best place to do that. Thanks, everybody. I'll talk to you again soon.